One of the questions that I've been getting recently from more than one student has been, how do you juggle multiple advice, conflicting feedback, and all that sort of stuff. And I'm going to use the case of a head here as a particular example. You could Google head proportion guides and you'll find a number of different systems. You'll find Loomis. A lot of people still swear by Loomis's guides. And then basically, I feel like every artist in the world has their own little way of judging what's accurate and what's not, right? So, with that said, there's going to be naturally a conflict. You know, um, from what I say and what someone else says, right? So, like for instance, like if we just pull up, this is Grissetti's head proportion guide from his anatomy course, and this was done quite some time ago, right? I think he's still in R6, so this is quite a few years ago. Which isn't to say that it's inaccurate or um, anything like that, because I think when I'm looking at this seems to line up with pretty much everything I've learned as well, for the most part, right? Uh, yeah, basically five-eye line, and then eyes halfway through the head, um, dividing half again, bottom of the nose, and then a third of the way down is the lips. Yep. Okay. So if I bring up this, for instance, so I'm using the see-through option here just to kind of gauge, and in this particular case, having it's I guess my usual reaction when I'm looking at a head like this in particular is the top of the head is too tall, right? But if you look at it from this kind of like really stark layout where all the measurements are guided, the actual height of the head is okay. It's just the placement of the features that needs a little bit adjusting. And once you adjust those, then things will line up better, right? So just moving the eyes up, the eyes in the current sculpt are just a little too large in general. And then lips are a little too large because really, well, I guess this proportion guide, the lip should end halfway through the eyeball if we're talking about convention, right? That should be about the case. But so here, just shifting that mass down would help immensely. The ears are also too high, and relative to what we're seeing here. And I think it's worth bringing up things like, say, for instance, Gnas has a book on drawing the head, and I mean some of this is the profile view seems a little bit different than say if you pull up Grissetti's, right? If you put these side by side, I think that's just gonna give you different results, and um, I don't know. How do you deal with this? Really, I think ultimately whatever looks right is going to be the best case, except for when you're learning, what looks right to you and what is actually right is going to be harder for you to determine. So it does help to have someone who is guiding you through that process. I think some level of trust too has to be given, and um, but some level of trust has to be given. But then at the same time, if you're getting feedback from multiple sources, I think you have to prioritize who is basically has final say. And final say is that kind of like in some ways it echoes something that happens in production environments where you have like an art director, you have your lead, you have your coworkers, your peers basically, and everybody's going to have a different opinion. And sometimes in the studio environment too, you get kind of pushed and pulled in different ways, and it becomes very very hard to work that way, right? Fortunately, I think the art director usually should have final say. So if at all else, you need to designate an art director in your particular case. Um, whatever your situation is going to be. Preferably someone who has the time to sit down and really explain some of the differences, and to kind of also explain why something might be pointed out as inaccuracy or incorrect placement of a feature, versus just saying it's wrong or saying it's right. Um, Again, if we just pull up, hey, Sorrel's head. A lot of people reference the Sorrel's head a lot, but proportionally, it's very stylized. It's a little bit mm, not inaccurate though. I guess the word I want to avoid using in all these terms, in all these cases, is inaccuracy, because it's really I think part of what makes all of these guides different. If we look at a bunch of these, just looking at Gnas, I think a bunch of Loomis comes up as well. You're going to just run into a case where a lot of this is shaped by that individual artist's preferences and how they've kind of just come to their own guide, or what they find appealing. Because at the end of the day, appeal is a big factor in what we're doing. And appeal doesn't have to mean pretty. It's just or what does another artist think is like a um, I guess important. I guess what are important features to communicate is more accurate in that sense than pretty, right? And if we look at this head some more, let me turn off the see-through here. Let me turn it off for now. And I had something else, so all right. So say this head here. I mean, I'm just kind of I've been going through and looking at different artists, and just seeing both how they break things down, and in an effort to help kind of facilitate this conversation about different opinions. But I mean, if I use this too, I think there's just from a quick glance, it looks like following very standard breakdowns of proportions, except for maybe the lips are a little lower. But I think that could also be for a number of reasons, possibly, you know, just the teeth structure on this particular head is different, etc. Right? But if we like do that same thing where we try and apply, or just compare, and we're just what's going on between these heads, then I think you'll see. Trying to find this is using a gray, comparing to similar materials in this mode is a little bit awkward. But see, again, just shifting the entire eye region up would help solve a lot of the problems. Um, Maybe nudging the nose up a little higher too. I personally always have a tendency of making my noses too long, both in drawing and sculpting. And that's something that I actively have to think about in order to prevent from happening. I mean, I think the general width of the head is okay. It's just usually the size and the placement of the eyes that is throwing you off. Um, and again, I would consider putting in or using just like making a very basic ear as an insert mesh, just so you're not fighting to create that silhouette change, because it does actually distract the viewer quite heavily when it's that kind of like amorphous, non-committal statement of, hey, this is an ear, right? And another point to clarify, especially if you look at the previous head critique I did, where the discussion of I should have looked at the terms for all of this earlier, but so this form here, this line or this ridge plus the corner of the temple, and then the ball form the forehead, right? And I've kind of encouraged students to avoid that for the time being, not because it doesn't exist, because obviously it does, and you'll see it in um, different diagrams, as you've probably noticed from the last video. But when that is kind of emphasized too early on in the process, I think in those, if certain measurements and proportions aren't handled accurately, then I think it's going to throw something off. It's going to throw off like the height of the head. It's going to like when I say accurately, say like this mass of the eyebrow here. I think this is too tall, right? So it's too tall, and really, if you look at, say, Pierre Benjamin's sculpt of Josh Brolin, it's not nearly as tall, right? Maybe the outside corner, which you kind of have here, but that's still proportionally like much higher than I think it should be. So I think once you rein in this here, right? Once you rein that in, and then you get that will give you this break in the silhouette of the head in the three-quarter view. Right, and then I think trying to get that ball form too is kind of making it an ambiguous statement of the front plane of the head versus the side plane, or the transition plane and the side plane, because now it just kind of shoots up to the side diagonally in kind of this forever sort of view. So we just confine it more. I think that would be more useful. I'm just going to pull the head down instead of moving the eye around, just because that's easier. Right. I also forgot to spot check the side of the head with Cressetti's model here. And so let's go back to ZBrush. Yeah, so I think the profile actually looks better to me, but you could probably, but the neck is still way too deep, just like what I discussed in the last video. And here, I mean, I think this is still like a fairly sizable head, or sizable person. Like I think, yeah, no, we're talking more in the terms of basic general guides, but I find maybe this neck length is still too long or too deep personally. And really, again, this really has to come down to what do you find appealing, what do you find important, what are the characteristics that define a head for you. So if I just line this back up to the eyes, that means I need to scale this up. I think it's too hard to kind of force the proportions in, because the scale of the eyes that you have to are kind of throwing off everything. Because the size of the eye, for one thing, will affect that 5-eye line rule of having 5 eyes across the width of the head. So I think just me going back in and being a little bit more freeform, and just kind of making my own judgment calls is going to be more useful here. And we just take a look back at here Benjamin's here head too. Like, just the slope of it's not that this can't happen, but I think one of the problems with the heads that you've been doing is typically you tend to slope this back more, and then the separation between the brow and the nose is ambiguous. It becomes like one plane. And not to say that doesn't happen in real life, but it's kind of, I think it's more of an abnormal, not an abnormality. It's more of an anomaly. It's more rare, so then you won't see it as often. And since you won't see that as often, I don't think that should be your average, right? So because we need that average to be able to push and pull into different styles in different directions. So like if we just look here and you're just looking at here, this where you get where he got this very distinct line. You know, there part of that is also how the eye is being furrowed down, or the eyebrows are being furrowed down. But still, it's a very stark transition, right? If we wanted to go rely on those averages again, I think the averages, if we're talking about basic head construction, usually is the top of the nose. I think my tablet sensitivity is not working, but the top of the nose, or the origin of the nose, is going to be about halfway between that visor shape of the eye, right? So that visor shape of this eye cavity, where I mean, I tend to draw this all the time, but it's going to be that as the uppermost forward-facing component of the head, and then here you get something like that, right? And about halfway up that mark is where this, what am I doing? Sorry, is where that bridge of the nose really starts to begin, right? And then if we go in and I'm just, for now, just for clarity, I'm going to say, hey, this is side plane of the nose. Hey, this is the top part of that side plane, really, and then maybe that inside corner of the eye socket is going too deep. If I look again on, kind of like, again, repeating some of the critique from the other video, it's very rare from the profile to see a lot of the eyeball, right? So when you pull back to the eyelid to that point where you see that large of a Pac-Man shape face profile for the eyeball, that is basically kind of warping your facial structure. Right, it's warping your facial structure, and then basically that's kicking everything too deep, and then again you're going to mess up that three-quarter profile view, right? So if I just push this forward, maybe we can start flattening the face a bit here, and I'm going to nudge this so we get, instead of like a completely flat plane of the front of the face, I'm going to go a little bit more of like at a diagonal here and pull that back, right? And then that just means that, oh yeah, this head is, let's turn off poly paint, and then go back here, and I'm going to turn off, wait, poly paint's off there too. We'll move this again. I think that general rule of having the upper eyelid overlapping the lower eyelid, or not overlapping, but overhanging, is just going to help push the realism on your faces. So this really needs to be like a diagonal shape between the bottom of the lower eyelid and then up, right? Because here now we're going to straight line, and that straight line is that also says that you can't feasibly blink, or like the upper eyelid is not going to come down over the shape of the form of the eyeball itself. Right? So I think again, this eyeball is too small. This could be flatter, because then that will give you that, again, that side plane of the nose. Again, just trying to fight against some of the ambiguities. You know, we need to work on the node itself. This needs to, we need some more form. Just looking at the highlighting, and turn off the alpha. Right. And having that shape kind of go like that is a little weird. So I'm going to kind of flip it all the way here. Probably extend the brow again, and then again this will kind of help. Actually, not too big of a fan of what I did, so I'll just kind of back out, and then I'll just leave it as that visor shape. And we'll try and treat this more as like a very, very rough general guide, making sure that the transition between the side of the face into the ear does not end in a cavity, because that shouldn't happen realistically. And then let's kind of like move some of this around, and then I feel like this is starting to come together better. Making sure that the overlap, I think this is pretty key, getting this overlap between of the upper eyelid and lower eyelid will help. And then let's see what else. Always making sure that there is a distinction in the depth of the inside corner of the eyelid versus the outside corner. That will just help with selling those fleshy forms, making sure that like the anatomy of the face is working at that point better, where you were still getting those bony landmarks that key you into the eye socket, and then the fleshy forms that tend to override everything, or not override, but to fill out the rest of the face towards the outside corners here. And we can probably just keep pushing this forward. Maybe the mouth is actually a little big. And then if we can define the jawline some more too, and something like that. Yeah. So yeah, this requires a little bit more work just to not totally warp the head, but hopefully that clarifies some, both again some forms of the head, and then ultimately, how do you juggle different advice. And if you have any questions, let me know.